Hi, my name is Stefan Korshak. I'm the Kyiv Post Senior Defense Correspondent, and I thought I'd try and talk to you today a little bit about the question of, okay, the United States is supplying Ukraine with a lot of ammunition and military support. Now fighting has started in Israel and in Gaza, and the United States has promised a lot of support to the Israelis. What will that do to supply to both of those countries from the Americans? Maybe the Americans can't handle it. Maybe the Americans are going to have to make a decision about who they like more. Well, we don't know for sure at Kyiv Post, but we can make some educated guesses. And there's a lot of information out there that helps in that kind of process. Conclusion that we've come to basically is that really we're talking about two different categories of military support. And to start looking at that in more detail, we think that probably a good thing to think about is what are the Americans' goals? What are their primary objectives with the military support? Well, in Ukraine, the support primarily is designed first and foremost to keep Russia from taking over Ukraine. And more specifically, at this point in time, to help sustain Ukraine in defensive battles of attrition over the long term, which will inflict casualties on Russian personnel and equipment, to prevent Russia from taking over Ukraine, and hopefully over time to convince Russia that it is unable to achieve its military goals in Ukraine and then to leave. In order to achieve those goals, the Ukrainians need, first and foremost, above anything else, ammunition. And the number one category that they need of ammunition is 155 millimeter howitzer ammunition. That's the backbone of the Ukrainian artillery. Thanks to NATO and particularly the United States, the Ukrainians have superiority over the Russians technically and the kind of artillery that they have and the range that it shoots. But it's not effective unless there are thousands of shells coming, or more exactly available, every single day. So the Americans are part of a coalition of Western governments that are providing Ukraine artillery ammunition, 155 millimeter artillery ammunition, and that is coming in large volumes. It comes by ship, and then by train usually, and then we think by truck, and then it's distributed to the various Ukrainian regional commands and then the units. And the key goal for the Americans in these massive artillery supplies, again, we're talking probably 3,000 to 5,000 rounds of 155 a day. So that works out to train loads every couple of weeks probably, is to keep it coming. The Ukrainians have their own reserves. They don't expend the ammunition at the same rate all the time in every place. And so the main problem for the Americans is to make sure that that flow of ammunition continues. That supply chain has been in place now for more than a year. The Americans are expanding their production capacity, so are the Europeans. And for the war here in Ukraine, the goal for the Americans is to keep that flow coming. That flow is important to bear in mind when we turn to Israel in a second. But besides the artillery ammunition, and there's other categories, there's 105 millimeter howitzer ammunition, there's 120 millimeter mortar ammunition. The Ukrainians need continuing supplies of anti-aircraft missiles. The Ukrainians, for practical purposes, don't have an air force. They defend their airspace with now mostly donated anti-aircraft systems, and those need anti-aircraft missiles, and a lot of them are manufactured in America. This is the AIM-9, this is the AIM-7, this is the Patriot. There are European systems as well, but since the Russians continually attack the Ukrainian front lines and cities like Kyiv, the Ukrainians are constantly shooting back with these missiles, and these missiles need replacement. In that sense, it's the same kind of problem for the Americans and the American logisticians as it is with the artillery ammunition. The goal is not quickly to get a bunch of anti-aircraft missiles right now to Ukraine, but rather to sustain the flow. And that flow, the supply chain for that flow, has been developed over time. So from the American point of view, the goal with protecting Ukrainian airspace, or helping to protect Ukrainian airspace, is to make sure that flow of anti-aircraft missiles primarily isn't broken. There are other categories of things that the Americans are supplying to the Ukrainians that the Ukrainians need. Spare parts for tanks, for instance. M1 tanks are now here in Ukraine. They're not really out on the battlefields very much, as nearly as we can tell. However, there's wear and tear. And the same goes for armored vehicles like the Bradley, like the Stryker. And those supply chains, again, in place, continuous, and the Ukrainians aren't really committing those systems to battle intensively. So from the American point of view, the goal is to keep the spare parts coming in a predictable flow. Now, turning to the Israelis and the American goals for the Israelis, the Israeli goals I don't really want to get into because that's not something that we try and speculate on here at Kyiv Post. But from the American point of view, in terms of what they're sending the Israelis, or would send the Israelis, or might plan to send the Israelis, it's really different categories of equipment and material. As nearly as we can tell, looking at the news reports, one of the top categories of material that was sent by airplane to Israel are laser-guided bombs in quantity. Now, the Americans do send bomb kits to the Ukrainians, but in very small numbers because the Ukrainians don't have an air force, so they don't really need lots of bombs. The Israelis, on the other hand, have a large and very effective air force, and they can go through a lot of guided bombs quickly. So that was one of the first things that the Americans sent to the Israelis. We believe that because of the nature of the fighting that the Israelis are going to be engaging in and are engaging in, there's going to be intensive use of fuel, of some laser-guided artillery shells, and to a lesser extent parts, but they're parts for American aircraft. So F-16, F-15, F-35, these are all going to be are already, I should say, already being intensively used by the Israelis. And it's logical to assume that as those planes are used in combat, the Americans already are going to be moving to pre-position spare parts to make sure that those Israeli aircraft, keep flying and performing the missions that they need to do. And I think that probably there's going to be a special focus by the Americans to make sure that the supply to the F-35 is made to work well, because this is probably, as far as I know, the first time that the F-35 has been being used intensively in combat. The simple message here is Ukraine has 0 F-16s, 0 F-15s, 0 F-35s. Therefore, the need for the Americans to provide any of the spare parts for those aircraft to the Ukrainians is non-existent. So, at the end of the day, if one were an American policymaker, one might be looking, I would say, would look at the Israeli operations in Gaza as operations that are going to be short, intensive, high-tech, and they need to be over quickly, and they are primarily going to be precision-guided weapons with a very large Air Force component. While in Ukraine, it's much more about sustaining a conventional war that is going to probably go on for months and months, if not years. So, can the Americans sustain it materially? Oh yeah, America's a superpower. They are capable of it. Will they do it? Well, that's a political question, and that brings one back to the question of sustainment to Ukraine and sustainment to Israel and how that plays out in the American political arena. That's a different topic, and but from a practical material point of view, the way it looks to us here at Kyiv Post, no. The two types of material support, military support to the two countries from America are basically different. So that was what I wanted to leave you with. That's what we seem to think here at Kyiv Post. We'll be watching, and if the situation changes, we'll probably try and get that out to you too. My name is Stefan Korshak. I'm the Kyiv Post Senior Defense Correspondent. If you like this video, please subscribe. We'll put down a like and tell your friends about us. Thank you.